Welcome to Sleepy Time Stories. Hey, dear friends, the first time you really think about it, it feels like a mistake. If evolution is supposed to be ruthlessly efficient, if natural selection is always shaving away anything that causes even a tiny disadvantage, then what on earth is left-handedness still doing here? 10% of the population everywhere, every continent, every culture we have ever studied. Despite the injuries, the social pressure, the forced corrections, the awkward tools and weapons built for the other 90%. If left-handedness were purely bad luck, purely a defect, purely a misfire in development, it should have been squeezed out long ago. But it wasn't. So tonight, as the world around you winds down and the noise of the day fades, let's sit with this strange number, that stubborn 10%, and ask a quiet but deeply unsettling question. What was so useful about left-handers that evolution wouldn't let them go? Picture a monastery in medieval France. The year is 1347. A young scribe sits hunched over a wooden desk, copying sacred text by candlelight. His left hand grips the quill, moving carefully across the parchment. But something is wrong. The ink smudges as his hand drags through the fresh letters. The writing slants awkwardly, leaning sideways like a tree about to fall. His cramped fingers ache from contorting around a tool designed for someone else's hand. The quill, cut by the right-handed scribe who used his desk before him, has a nib that scrapes rather than glides when pushed instead of pulled. The abbot watches from across the room, frowning. This left-handed tendency, he believes, is a sign of something sinister. The boy must be corrected. He will be beaten if necessary. His left hand will be tied behind his back during writing lessons. The church teaches that the left side belongs to the devil, that the righteous sit at God's right hand, that the left is for liars, traitors, and those who have made pacts with darkness. The young scribe knows this. He has heard the sermons. He has seen the paintings of the Last Judgment, where the saved ascend to heaven on Christ's right, and the damned are dragged to hell on his left. Every time he reaches for his quill with his left hand, he feels a small electric thrill of fear. Maybe the abbot is right. Maybe there is something wrong with him. Maybe he is marked. Now fast forward to today. You are sitting in a coffee shop, maybe watching a video on your phone. Or perhaps you are lying in bed, the blue light of a screen casting shadows across your pillow. Look around. In a room of 100 people, roughly 10 of them are left-handed. That barista making your latte with a smooth practice pour. That student taking notes on a laptop. Fingers flying across keys that are mercifully symmetrical. That businessman signing documents with flourish. His left hand leaving a trail of ink that will never smudge because ballpoint pens dry almost instantly. 1 in 10. Maybe it is you. Here is what is strange about that number. It never changes. Across every human population ever studied, in every country, in every culture throughout all of recorded history, the percentage of left-handers remains locked at approximately 10%. Sometimes it is 9%. Sometimes it is 12%. But it always hovers right around that magical 1 to 10 ratio. From ancient Greece to modern Japan, from medieval Europe to contemporary Brazil, from the Ice Age steppes of Siberia to the tropical islands of Polynesia, 10%. That is not normal. That is deeply, profoundly weird. Evolution does not preserve traits at stable percentages for tens of thousands of years, unless there is a reason. Natural selection is supposed to be ruthless. It is the merciless sculptor of human evolution, the same force that nearly wiped us out 900,000 years ago when our ancestors' population dropped to perhaps fewer than 1,300 breeding individuals. If being left-handed offered no advantage, random genetic drift should have pushed the percentage towards 0 centuries ago. The constant low-level costs, more accidents with right-handed tools, smeared writing, the social stigma, the occasional death in battle because a shield was designed for the wrong arm, would have slowly but inexorably eliminated left-handedness from the gene pool. And if being left-handed did offer a clear, consistent advantage, the percentage should be much higher, 50%, 80%, 100%. But instead, left-handedness stays frozen at 10% generation after generation after generation, as if something is actively maintaining that exact proportion, as if there's a hidden hand, perhaps a left one, keeping the balance. This is the central mystery we are going to unravel. Why is natural selection, that merciless sculptor allowed left-handedness to persist. Most genetic traits follow predictable patterns. Blue eyes, red hair, certain blood types. They exist because they are either neutral or they offer some advantage in specific environments. But left-handedness does not fit that model. For most of human history, being left-handed has been a disadvantage. Tools were designed for righties. Weapons were built for righties. Writing systems flowed in directions that suited righties. In many cultures, using your left hand was considered unclean, evil, or demonic. The Latin word for left is sinister. The French word is gauche, meaning awkward or clumsy. In Arabic, the left hand is reserved for unclean tasks, and offering it to someone in greeting is a profound insult. For centuries, left-handed children were punished, beaten, had their left hands tied behind their backs to force them to conform. Even into the 1960s and 70s, schools in Europe and North America routinely forced left-handed students to write with their right hands, often through physical punishment and public humiliation. Teachers would walk the aisles with rulers, striking any hand that reached for a pencil from the wrong side. And yet, despite thousands of years of cultural pressure, despite no obvious evolutionary advantage, despite living in a world literally built for the opposite hand, left-handers persist at exactly 10%. The question gets even more fascinating when you look at the evidence. We can trace left-handedness back through human history in surprising ways. Ancient tools show where patterns from left-handed use. When a right-handed person makes a stone tool by striking one rock against another, they hold the core in their left hand and strike with their right, creating a characteristic pattern of flaking angles and impact points. Left-handed makers leave a mirror image. Archaeologists have analyzed thousands of stone tools from sites spanning hundreds of thousands of years, from early Homo erectus camps to Neanderthal shelters to modern human settlements, and the pattern is eerily consistent. About 90% of tools show right-handed manufacturing. About 10% show left-handed patterns. The ratio holds across continents, across cultures, across time. Cave paintings tell the same story. Deep in limestone caverns across Europe, places like El Castillo in Spain, Chauvet in France, Pech Merle in the Dordogne, ancient humans left something extraordinary. Hand stencils, negative images created by placing a hand against a rock wall and blowing pigment around it. They are hauntingly beautiful. These hands reaching out to us across 40,000 years. Some are so well preserved you can see individual fingerprints. And they reveal handedness because most people use their dominant hand to do the precise work of spraying, placing their non-dominant hand against the wall. Researchers have cataloged thousands of these stencils, and about 10% appear to be right hands, suggesting the artists were left-handed and placed their dominant hand on the wall while spraying with their left. The same ratio existed then. Even fossilized teeth carry the secret. Neanderthals, those robust Ice Age humans who lived across Europe and Western Asia, had a distinctive feeding habit. When they ate meat, they would hold one end in their teeth and cut off pieces with a stone tool held in their hand. Their front teeth showed distinctive patterns, scratch marks running at angles across the enamel. The angle of those scratches reveals which hand held the tool. Right-handed cutting leaves, scratches angling one way. Left-handed cutting leaves, scratches angling the other. When researchers analyzed Neanderthal teeth from multiple sites across Europe, some dating back 150,000 years, they found the same 90-10 pattern. Most showed right-handed cutting. A minority showed left-handed patterns. The 10% were there, living among their right-handed cousins, surviving the Ice Age, raising families, leaving their mark in the fossil record. Something was maintaining this balance, keeping it constant even as human populations evolved, migrated, and adapted to radically different environments. But not all ancient cultures treated handedness equally. The ancient Egyptians, with their obsessive attention to artistic detail, had strong conventions about how to depict human figures. In formal art, proper Egyptians were shown in standardized poses, doing things the right way, the proper way, and the proper way was right-handed. Left-handedness in Egyptian art appears only in specific contexts. Enemies in battle scenes, foreigners engaged in strange customs, demons and chaos entities. The iconography is subtle but consistent. To depict someone as left-handed was to mark them as other, as outside the proper order of things. The Greeks and Romans took this further, embedding it in their language itself. The Latin word for left was sinister. Yes, that's sinister, the one that still means threatening, evil, malevolent in modern English. The word for right was dexter, which gives us dexterous, meaning skillful and adroit. The linguistic bias was explicit. Right equals good, skillful, proper. Left equals bad, clumsy, threatening. Greek and Roman authors wrote casually about left-handedness as an unfortunate condition, a minor deformity to be corrected if possible. They associated it with weakness, bad luck, and untrustworthiness. To take an oath with your left hand was to make it invalid or even blasphemous. To offer your left hand in greeting was an insult, and yet, despite all this cultural pressure, despite centuries of stigma and attempt at correction, the 10% persisted. You can see it in the archaeological record of classical antiquity. Tools, weapons, where patterns on ancient amphitheaters where gladiators trained, all show the same ratio. About 10% of Romans were left-handed, whether Roman culture approved or not. The medieval Christian church turned prejudice into persecution. Church theologians developed an elaborate symbolic system where right represented God, righteousness, and salvation, while left represented Satan, sin, and damnation. In medieval artwork, God's chosen souls ascend to heaven on his right side, while the damned are dragged to hell on his left. Angels stand to the right of Christ, demons to the left. When priests bless congregations, they always use their right hand. Using the left would have been blasphemous, an invitation for demonic forces. Left-handed people became suspects by nature. During the witch trials that swept through Europe from the 15th to 18th centuries, left-handedness was sometimes cited as evidence of demonic possession or witchcraft. Accusers pointed to the way suspected witches used their left hand for daily tasks as proof they had made pacts with Satan. It was not definitive evidence, but it was noted, recorded, added to the list of suspicious behaviors that could send someone to the stake or the gallows. Imagine being a left-handed child in 16th century Europe. From your earliest years, every time you reach for something with your natural hand, adults react with horror. Your parents slap your hand away, force you to use the right one instead. Teachers tie your left hand behind your back or to your chair. Priests warn you that your natural inclination is the devil's mark upon your soul. You learn to hate a fundamental part of yourself, to see your own body as corrupted and wrong. The psychological toll is devastating. And yet, despite all of this, the left-handers did not disappear. The Victorians turned forced conversion into a systematic project. In the 19th century, as industrialization transformed society, left-handedness was redefined as a defect to be corrected through modern scientific methods. Victorian educators and physicians believed they could improve humanity through proper training and moral discipline. Left-handedness was seen as a sign of atavism, a reversion to a more primitive state that could be fixed with enough rigor and determination. Schools implemented strict policies. Teachers walked the aisles during writing lessons, ruler in hand, ready to strike any child caught using their left hand. The punishment was not occasional. It was constant. Every day, multiple times per day, left-handed children faced physical pain for trying to write naturally. Some schools used more elaborate methods. They tied children's left hands to their desks or behind their backs for hours at a time. They forced children to sit on their left hands during lessons. They created special restraining devices that prevented the left hand from moving toward the writing surface. The rationale went beyond simple conformity. Victorian educators genuinely believed that forcing children to use their right hands would improve their moral character, strengthen their willpower, and train them to resist their base instincts. Left-handedness was lumped together with other behaviors that needed to be controlled through discipline, like bedwetting or nail-biting. It was seen as a childish tendency that proper education would eliminate. The damage was real. Children who were forced to switch hands showed dramatically higher rates of stuttering and other speech impediments. The connection makes sense neurologically. Speech centers in the brain are closely linked to hand preference. Forcing someone to write with their non-dominant hand disrupts these neural pathways, sometimes causing permanent changes to speech patterns. Reading difficulties were common, too. Children forced to switch hands often developed dyslexia-like symptoms, reversing letters or reading words backward. Their school performance suffered across the board. Many were labeled as slow learners or mentally deficient, when in reality, they were fighting against their own neurology every time they tried to complete an assignment. The emotional damage was perhaps worst of all. Decades later, adults who had been forced to switch hands as children reported lingering anxiety, low self-esteem, and feelings of fundamental wrongness about themselves. The constant punishment for using their natural hand had taught them that something essential about who they were was bad and needed to be suppressed. Some reported nightmares well into adulthood about teachers and rulers and the pain in their left hands. But here is what is remarkable. Despite centuries of persecution, despite systematic efforts to eliminate left-handedness from human populations, the percentage never changed. Still 10%, generation after generation. The pressure that maintained that frequency was stronger than any cultural force humans could create. The left-hander survived not just because they were lucky, but because evolution had decided they were necessary. Human prejudice was no match for natural selection's logic. Picture a different kind of bottleneck. Not a climate disaster this time, but narrow canyon at dawn. The air is cold. Your breath hangs in front of you. You have walked all night with your small war band, feet blistered, hands tied around a spear whose wood is polished smooth where countless fingers have gripped it before you. Ahead, another group is waiting. Not strangers. Rivals you have raided, been raided by, watched from a distance across river valleys and dry plains. You know how they move. You know how they fight. Your father fought men just like them. So did his father. But they do not know how you fight, because you are left-handed. In our peaceful, electrified late-night world, handedness mostly shows up when you smudge ink, bump elbows at dinner, or wrestle with an opener clearly designed by a right-hander. In the world your ancestors knew, handedness could mean something much more serious. It could mean who walked away from a fight. Biologists have a term for this: frequency-dependent selection. It sounds abstract, mathematical, like something scribbled on a whiteboard in a university office. But at its core, it is simple. The rarer you are, the more dangerous you become. Imagine every fighter in your community grows up sparring, wrestling, practicing with sticks or spears or bare hands. Day after day, they train to read the body of a right-handed opponent, the way the right shoulder drops just before a strike. The rhythm of footwork when the power hand is in the same place every time. The angles of attack, the blind spots, their entire nervous system is tuned to that pattern. Then one evening under flickering firelight, they face you and everything is reversed. Your power hand is where their brain does not expect it to be. Your lead leg steps when theirs would normally retreat. The blow they think is coming from their right flashes out from their left. All those precise, well-rehearsed offensive moves suddenly do not quite fit. They are a half-second late, a few centimeters off. In a friendly match, that is just confusing. In a real fight, that half-second can be the distance between a shallow cut and a killing blow. This is the heart of the fighting advantage theory for left-handers. Not that left-handers are stronger or braver or inherently better fighters, but that in a world dominated by right-handers, their rarity itself becomes a weapon. And the data, as far as it goes, seems to agree. When researchers look at modern combat sports, a curious pattern appears. In most human populations, about 10% of people are left-handed, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. But in professional boxing, that number jumps. In some studies, around 20, even 25% of top-level fighters are left-handed or fight in a left-handed stance. Fencing shows something similar. This sport is practically designed to showcase handedness. One opponent, one weapon, narrow angles, fast reactions. In international competitions, left-handers are consistently overrepresented. In some elite tournaments, more than a third of the finalists are left-handed, far above what you would expect by chance. You see echoes of this in judo, in mixed martial arts, in certain racket sports like table tennis. Even in tennis, where equipment, coaching, and strategy can be adjusted, left-handed players punch above their numerical weight. Famous champions like Rafael Nadal turned their left-handed play into a unique tactical problem opponents had to solve. It is not that every left-handed boxer or fencer becomes a champion. Most do not. Skill, Training, conditioning, and strategy still matter far more. But when you average across thousands of matches and hundreds of athletes, the same signal keeps appearing. In one-on-one physical contests where reaction time, surprise, and split-second misjudgments decide outcomes, left-handers seem to enjoy a small but real advantage. Now, in a modern boxing ring, that might mean a slightly better win percentage, a little more prize money, a few more trophies. In a prehistoric raid when weapons were stone and bone and fire-hardened wood, and you did not have paramedics waiting just outside the circle, that same small advantage might have meant more children surviving to adulthood, more genes carried forward, which is where evolution begins to take notice. If left-handers do better in violent face-to-face conflict because they are rare, then natural selection will tend to favor left-handedness in exactly those environments where such fighting is common. But there is a catch. If too many people become left-handed, the surprise disappears. Fighters start training for both stances. The advantage fades. This is the balance hypothesis of handedness. Left-handers may have an edge in certain situations, but that edge only exists while they are in the minority. If they ever became too common, the advantage would collapse, and natural selection would push their numbers back down. The result is a tug-of-war between risk and reward. On one side, there's the increased cost that sometimes comes with being different neurologically, slightly higher rates of some developmental issues, for instance, or the challenges of living in a right-handed world. On the other side, in the right kind of environment, one where fights are frequent, deadly, and often decided in close quarters, there's a powerful payoff for being the unexpected fighter. If those two forces balance out, you get a stable minority. Not 50% left-handed, not zero, but somewhere in the middle, around the level we actually see in modern populations. And humans, for most of our history, lived in exactly the kind of world where a small edge in combat might have mattered a great deal. Blood feuds, raids at dawn, ambushes along game trails, duels over stolen animals or insults or scarce water. Archaeological sites from the Stone Age show skeletons with heel fractures, embedded spear points, skulls cracked by clubs. Ancient cemeteries tell stories of groups wiped out violently, not just by famine or disease, but by other humans. In many small-scale traditional societies studied by anthropologists in the last few centuries, rates of interpersonal violence are much higher than in most modern states. Homicide rates in some of these communities have been estimated at 10, 20, even 50 times contemporary Western levels. And there is another pattern that quietly emerges. In several of these more violent societies, the percentage of left-handers appears to be higher than the global average. Some studies of traditional groups in parts of South America and the Pacific have reported left-handedness rates of 15, 20, occasionally even 25%, far above the typical 10. These are communities where hand-to-hand combat raids and ritualized fighting were once central parts of life, where boys grew up knowing that one day they might have to stand in a clearing, heart-hammering, and face another man with spear or club or bow. The sample sizes are small. The methods are imperfect. These are not clean, laboratory-controlled experiments. But as a pattern, it is suggestive. Where violence is more common, left-handedness sometimes becomes more common, too, as if natural selection is quietly tuning the population, rewarding the rare fighters who can use their unusual orientation as a weapon. This idea is not new. Thousands of years ago, storytellers had already noticed something about left-handed warriors. In the Hebrew Bible, there is a curious little detail in the book of Judges. It describes a group of soldiers from the tribe of Benjamin, 700 men who were, the text emphasizes, all left-handed. Each one, it says, could sling a stone at a hare and not miss. This is not just a throwaway line. It is repeated, highlighted. To the ancient writer, the left-handedness of these warriors was worth recording. So was their deadly precision. Elsewhere in the same book, the hero Ehud is described as left-handed. He uses this to his advantage. When he visits a foreign king, the guards check where they expect a right-handed man to hide a weapon on the right thigh, and find nothing. Ehud strapped his blade to the opposite thigh. When the moment comes, his left hand draws from an unexpected angle. The king does not have time to react. Now, did these stories preserve a real military practice, a specialized corps of left-handed slingers, or are they symbolic, emphasizing the tribe's uniqueness? It is hard to know, but the fact that left-handedness is mentioned at all suggests ancient observers had already linked it with something unusual in combat. And it was not just the warriors themselves who thought carefully about handedness. The very architecture of medieval warfare seems to carry its imprint. Walk up the spiral staircase of a stone castle. If you ever get the chance, notice the direction of the turn. In many European fortifications, the stairs twist clockwise as they rise. It is not an accident. It is a design choice with blood in it. Picture an attacker storming the tower, sword or spear in his right hand. As he climbs a narrow clockwise staircase, the inner wall on his right side cramps his weapon. There is barely any room to swing. The outer side on his left is open, but he has no blade there. Now imagine the defender coming down the stairs, also right-handed. His sword arm is on the outside edge of the spiral. With all the open space, he needs to strike downward. Gravity is on his side. The architecture itself has become a weapon favoring the defender's dominant hand. But what about a left-handed attacker? He is in the minority, so the staircase was not designed with him in mind. Yet on that cramped spiral, his blade now occupies the open side. His left arm has space to strike, where a right-hander would be jammed against the inner wall. In a small, twisting, chaotic melee, that could be a genuine advantage. Did castle architects explicitly think about left-handed enemies? Probably not, or at least there is no solid documentary evidence that they did. The main goal was to disadvantage the typical attacker, and the typical attacker was overwhelmingly right-handed. Left-handers were too rare to dictate building codes, but the geometry of stone still created a loophole. In a world built for right-handers, a left-handed fighter could sometimes find unexpected angles, unexpected openings, even in staircases designed to kill him. This is a strange position left-handers have often occupied in human history. Not the default, not the assumed, but occasionally, in very specific circumstances, the best possible fit. In a world where violence was a daily possibility, these accidental advantages mattered. A right-hander could train to fight another right-hander thousands of times. A left-hander, if he survived his first few encounters, might find that most opponents simply were not ready for him. But evolution is patient. It does not push all the way to extremes. If the fighting advantage of left-handedness is real, and the evidence points that way, even if it is not yet ironclad, it comes with built-in breaks. Make left-handers too common, and opponents adapt. Training systems shift. Young warriors practice with both stances. Whatever surprise a minority once held dissolves. At that point, any downsides of left-handedness, whether biological or cultural, start to matter more again, and the frequency is nudged back down. So the system settles into a rough equilibrium. A small, persistent minority, big enough that the trait never disappears, small enough that it never loses its edge entirely. Across tens of thousands of years, through spears and swords and boxing gloves, left-handers have occupied that narrow slot. Not so rare as to vanish, not so common as to become ordinary. Their hands write awkwardly on school desks designed for others. They bump elbows at shared tables. They curse scissors and can openers. But in the shadows of history, in the ring, in the duel, on the spiral stair, their difference may sometimes have been exactly what kept them and their descendants alive. That quiet, dangerous advantage in the oldest human game of all, the game of conflict and survival, may be one of the reasons left-handedness still walks beside us today, an enduring minority in a right-handed world. Now shift the camera in your mind forward in time. Human evolution has done its brutal work. The bottlenecks, the ice ages, the migrations, all of that is behind us. Cities exist now. Cathedrals, empires, concert halls, universities. The tools are no longer stone flakes and fire-hardened spears, but quill pens, paintbrushes, violins, telescopes, and primitive computers filling entire rooms. And through all of this, that stubborn 10% of left-handers kept appearing in every generation like a quiet watermark running through human history. You can trace them if you know where to look. In the slant of brush strokes across a ceiling, in the direction of a musician's guitar, in the cramped, sideways angle of handwriting on brittle paper, in the stories that survive about how they held a sword or a pen or the hand of a nation. Begin with the man whose notebooks still feel like an alien mind fell to earth, Leonardo da Vinci. Imagine him at a wooden table in some dim Florentine workshop, oil lamp flickering, the air smelling of smoke and varnish. Sheets of paper spread out in front of him, anatomical sketches, fly machines, gears and pulleys, studies of light and water. He dips his quill in ink and starts to write. But if you or I lean over his shoulder, the words look wrong. The letters are reversed, as if someone has flipped reality in a mirror. To read them easily, you literally have to hold the page up to a looking glass. This is Leonardo's famous mirror writing. People have offered explanations for centuries. Was he hiding his ideas so others could not steal them? Was he protecting himself from church authorities who might not appreciate drawings of dissected corpses and speculative flying machines? Was it just a quirky code, a private game? Those are possibilities. But there's another idea that fits neatly with that 10%. He was very strongly left-handed. Writing in ink with a quill as a left-hander creates a simple annoying problem. You smear everything. Your hand moves across the fresh letters, dragging the still wet ink into a blur. Unless you do something clever, reverse the direction, and suddenly being left-handed becomes an advantage. Your hand trails behind the writing, not over it. The ink stays crisp. The page stays clean. Mirror writing is no longer a mysterious cipher. It is a practical adaptation in a right-handed world. And it may also tell us something about how Leonardo's brain worked. Left-handers, on average, show slightly different patterns of brain lateralization. The lines dividing language, spatial reasoning, and visual processing between hemispheres can be less rigid, more flexible. Leonardo was not just a painter or an engineer or an anatomist. He was all of those at once. His notebooks fuse art and science without even acknowledging a border between them. When you look at those backwards pages, you are not just seeing a trick of the hand. You are seeing a mind comfortable thinking in reversals, reflections, rotations. A brain that can imagine a human heart not just as a symbol of emotion, but as a pump of valves and vortices. Then flip that mental image around and draw it from every angle. The left hand is just a visible clue. Now look up. You are standing in the Sistine Chapel. The room is quiet late at night after the crowds have gone home. The ceiling floats above you like a stone sky. Adam reaching out to the hand of God. Prophets, sibyls, curling bodies. The entire story of creation stretched overhead. For centuries, people assumed Michelangelo painted all this the way most artists did. Right hand, brush up to plaster. Then X-rays, close studies, and careful analysis of the brushwork started to suggest something stranger. The strokes, the direction of the shading, the way the paint is laid down, all hint that Michelangelo may have worked predominantly with his left hand, especially on the ceiling. Picture him there, lying on scaffolding, body twisted, arm raised for hours, days, years, his hand cramping, pigment dripping into his eyes. In those extreme physical conditions, you do not choose which hand to use based on social expectation. You use the hand that feels natural, the one that gives you control. Documents from his time mention a left-handed tendency. Sketches show hatching and shading consistent with a left-hander's movement. It is not absolute proof, but the pattern keeps pointing in the same direction. If this is true, then two of the greatest artists of the Renaissance, Leonardo designing fantasies of the future, Michelangelo carving and painting human bodies that look like they could breathe, were both working from that same 10% variant. In an era when left-handedness was often discouraged, punished, or literally tied behind a child's back, they turned into beauty that still pulls necks upward centuries later. But not every left-handed figure in history is remembered for what they created. Some are remembered for the empires they commanded. Napoleon Bonaparte is one of them. Open almost any list of famous left-handers, and his name appears near the top. The mighty general, the emperor of the French, the man whose campaigns reshaped Europe and whose face still stares out from portraits with that famous hand tucked into his waistcoat. But here the story gets slippery. Was Napoleon actually left-handed? The evidence is mixed. Some contemporaries describe him writing with his right hand. Military documents and signatures are consistent with right-handed penmanship. Portraits often show him holding a sword or telescope in the right hand. So, how did he become a legendary left-hander? Part of it may be simple myth-making. In the 19th and 20th centuries, authors and illustrators liked the idea that great generals were different, that they saw the battlefield from an unexpected angle, attacked from the side others did not anticipate. Left-handedness, with its built-in asymmetry, became an easy metaphor for strategic unpredictability. It is possible Napoleon had some degree of mixed-handedness, or that he favored his left in certain tasks. But when historians look closely, the case for him as a clear, consistent left-hander weakens. And yet the myth persists. That persistence is telling. It shows how strongly we have come to associate left-handedness with a certain kind of mind, unconventional, strategic, a little bit dangerous. Whether or not Napoleon truly fit the category, people wanted him there. They wanted the man who rewrote Europe's map to have literally led with the opposite hand. If Napoleon is a doubtful member of the left-handed club, others in power are not. Move now to the polished corridors of European palaces. Soft candlelight reflecting on gold-framed portraits, scrolls, wax seals, and ceremonial pens. Queen Victoria, ruler of the British Empire at its height in the 19th century, appears in this story, too. Surviving records and handwriting analysis suggest she favored her left hand. Observers describe awkward attempts, especially in childhood, to write with her right. A familiar story. A natural left-hander pushed toward conformity, then slipping back toward what felt normal whenever possible. She was not alone among royals. Throughout European history, hints of left-handed monarchs and princes keep surfacing. Unusual sword grips and paintings, reverse signatures, descriptions by tutors and courtiers. Not all are certain, but the pattern is suggestive. In a world obsessed with lineage, bloodlines, and inherited traits, left-handedness would quietly run through dynasties the same way eye color and jawlines did. A queen signing documents with a left hand. A prince fencing with a stance that wrong-footed his opponent. Small deviations in a rigid ceremonial world. Then cross the ocean. The setting shifts to a younger nation, to crowded campaign rallies, crackling radio addresses, grainy black and white footage, and later high-definition debates broadcast to millions. American presidents. If you take all U.S. presidents, the percentage of left-handers looks roughly similar to the general population. But something changes when you zoom in on the 20th century. Suddenly, the 10% starts to look more like a pattern. Harry Truman is sometimes listed as ambidextrous with a strong left-hand preference. Gerald Ford, a star athlete before politics, was left-handed. Ronald Reagan is reported as naturally left-handed. Retrained early in life, a common practice in his generation. George H.W. Bush wrote left-handed. Bill Clinton, distinctly left-handed. Barack Obama famously signing bills and documents with a left hand that cameras love to capture. Not every recent president has been left-handed, of course, but the cluster is notable. Is there a deep explanation? Maybe, maybe not. It could be partly statistical noise. It could reflect shifting attitudes. As the social stigma against left-handedness eased in the 20th century, fewer children were forced to switch, so more left-handers reached visible positions without hiding it. There is also the possibility that the same slight neural differences that show up in many left-handers, more bilateral language representation, different patterns of connectivity, might correlate with certain strengths in communication, improvisation, or problem-solving under pressure, skills that help in modern politics. We cannot say for sure, but the visual of modern presidents, pens poised in their left hands as they sign laws and treaties, has become part of the public memory. The minority hand guiding majority power. Now leave the halls of power and step onto a stage. The lights go down, the crowd hums, an amplifier crackles to life. A single guitar hangs low against a musician's body, strap cutting across a left shoulder, neck angled the wrong way. For right-handed audiences, it looks slightly off at first glance. Then the sound hits, and nobody cares which hand is doing what. Left-handed musicians have always had to deal with instruments built for the other 90%. Violins, pianos, drum kits, guitars. Almost every design assumes the dominant right hand will handle the finest motions. Most left-handed musicians adapt. They learn right-handed instruments, retraining their brains and fingers. But some decide to flip the world around them instead. Picture Jimi Hendrix on stage, a left-hander playing a right-handed guitar turned upside down, strings reversed. The instrument is literally reversed in his hands. The bass strings, where the treble strings usually are, the controls and whammy bar on the opposite side. This oddness becomes part of his sound. Bends, vibrato, core voicings, the way notes ring and sustain, all slightly different because the geometry of his playing is different. His left-handedness is not just a biographical detail. It is woven into the texture of his music. Then there is Paul McCartney, a left-handed bassist and guitarist in the Beatles, one of the most influential bands in history. Watch old performance footage and you will see it instantly. The mirror image stance, his bass neck pointing the opposite way from his bandmates' guitars. Songwriting, melody, bass lines that dance and underpin the music at once, all shaped physically by a left hand leading. Later, in the 1990s, Kurt Cobain of Nirvana walks on stage with left-handed guitars in an era when such instruments are more available but still less common. His playing, aggressive and raw, helped define an entire genre. Again, that reverse stance, that left-hand dominance becomes part of the visual language of rebellion. In each case, being left-handed forced an early choice: conform to right-handed instruments or bend the tool to fit the body. Either way, extra adaptation was required, extra thought, extra work, and that extra work might have opened small, unexpected doors in style and technique. Step quietly now into a different kind of stage, a laboratory, a chalkboard, a dimly lit room with notes full of equations, diagrams, logical symbols. Not all left-handers are artists or leaders. Some are the people who pry open the invisible rules of the universe. Marie Curie is often cited as left-handed, though the evidence is not fully conclusive. Surviving photographs suggest a preference, and some accounts support it. But records from her time were not always precise about such details. Still, imagine her in that makeshift lab in Paris, stirring glowing radioactive samples with painstaking care, handwriting cramped notes late into the night. She discovered 2 new elements, pioneered research into radioactivity, and became the first person in history to win Nobel Prizes in 2 different scientific fields. If she was indeed left-handed, she joins a group of scientists and innovators who seem comfortable working at the edges of the known world. One member of that group is much more clearly documented: Alan Turing, mathematician, codebreaker, and one of the intellectual fathers of computer science. Turing was left-handed. In photographs, you can see the pen in his left hand, the chalk held awkwardly but confidently as he writes on a board. During World War II at Bletchley Park, Turing and his colleagues worked to crack the German Enigma codes. It was an exercise in pattern recognition, logic, and imagination, seeing possibilities where others saw only noise. Later, in his theoretical work, he essentially outlined the blueprint for the modern computer before such machines properly existed. It is tempting to draw a neat line. Left-handedness leads to unconventional thinking, which leads to genius. But reality is rarely that simple. Most geniuses are right-handed, just as most people are. Left-handers are a minority in every field. Yet when researchers look at certain populations, especially among people working at the extreme ends of creativity, mathematics, or spatial reasoning, a slight overrepresentation of left hand sometimes appears. Not a dramatic one, not a guarantee, but a hint. It may be that the same developmental processes that occasionally produce left-handedness also, in some individuals, produce brains that are wired in less typical ways. Brains more likely to combine ideas across domains, to flip perspectives, to approach problems from a metaphorical left when everyone else is coming from the right. Or it may be simpler. Being left-handed in a right-handed world forces constant small adaptations. Every desk, every tool, every door handle is a tiny puzzle. Over years, thousands of these micro-challenges might exercise parts of the brain that handle flexibility, inhibition, and problem-solving. The world, from a left-hander's point of view, is slightly but persistently misaligned. Learning to live in it means learning to think around edges. What we can say without exaggeration is this: from vaulted ceilings to battlefields, from thrones to voting booths, from concert stages to code-breaking huts, left-handers have always been there, not as a separate species or a secret society, but as a quiet, consistent thread running through our shared story. The 10% that natural selection never pruned away did more than just survive. They painted the sky. They signed laws. They bent guitars to their will. They cracked codes, split atoms, and imagined machines that could think. And all the while, most of them were just living their lives in a world built for the opposite hand, adapting day by day in ways no one bothered to record. To see them clearly, you have to look closely. Watch which hand holds the pen, which arm lifts the sword, which fingers dance on the strings. Then you start to notice that in every era, in every culture, that minority keeps resurfacing. The question is why? Why did evolution keep them? What was the advantage that balanced out the inconvenience? To answer that, you have to leave the painters and presidents behind and walk back into the realm of everyday life, into classrooms and factories, kitchens and offices, into all the small invisible negotiations that left-handers make every day just to exist in a right-handed world. Because hidden in those daily struggles is the evolutionary riddle's final clue. Picture yourself waking up tomorrow in a world where almost every object in your home, every tool at your job, every line on every page was designed for a body that is not quite yours. Not a different species, not a different size, just mirrored. That is the everyday reality of being left-handed in a right-handed world. For most people, right-handedness is like gravity, invisible, taken for granted, never questioned. But if you are in the 10%, you notice it every time you reach for something that fights you back. Start small. You pick up a pair of scissors. Before we close, if you found this journey through the science and history of left-handedness calming or thought-provoking, you might want to share it with someone you know who is left-handed, or someone who once tried to correct a left-hander and might see them differently now. Over time, these stories become a kind of map, a quiet record of left-handers and right-handers listening together, scattered across the planet, in a world that repeatedly tried to smooth out every difference, to make every child write the same way, hold the same tools, follow the same line. 10% of humanity quietly resisted. They adapted. They endured. They passed their traits and their stories down through generation after generation. Maybe there is a lesson there for all of us, that sometimes the things that make us inconvenient are the very things that help a species survive, and that in the long memory of our kind, there is space not just for the majority that fits the mold, but for the persistent minority that does not. So tonight, as you settle into sleep, consider the left hand of someone you love, or your own left hand, resting on the blanket. That hand carries a history 100,000 years deep. It has held spears and paintbrushes, quills and swords, the hands of children, and the edges of cliffs. It has been beaten and blessed, cursed and celebrated. And still, generation after generation, it reaches out, the same 10%, the same stubborn, beautiful, inexplicable difference. Evolution made room for it. The world is still learning to do the same. Good night, sweet dreams.